Theo had always been drawn to the quiet corners of the city. The dark alleyways that others avoided held a certain allure for him, a place where the noise of life seemed to dull and fade away. Maybe that's why he noticed it, the street that shouldn't exist. He had been walking home after a long shift at the bar, his footsteps echoing down an unusually quiet boulevard. The usual chaos of downtown was replaced by a strange stillness that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. That's when he saw it. A narrow street tucked between two towering buildings, where he swore there had only been a brick wall before. Curiosity flickered in his mind as he hesitated at the entrance. Ember Lane, the sign read, though he couldn't remember ever seeing it before. The flickering neon lights of shop windows spilled out onto the cobblestone road, and the scent of freshly baked bread wafted through the air. It was a street bustling with life, but not the kind of life he was used to seeing at this hour. He stepped forward, a chill running down his spine as he crossed the threshold. The moment his feet touched the cobblestones, the sounds of the city vanished entirely, replaced by the quiet hum of conversation, laughter, and the distant tinkling of wind chimes. A group of people strolled past him, their faces blurry in the dim light. But there was something wrong with the way they moved. Too fluid, too inhuman. Theo's pulse quickened, but his curiosity dragged him deeper into the street. Shops lined both sides, their windows glowing with an eerie warmth. A woman inside a clothing store waved at him with a too-wide smile, her teeth glinting in the soft light. A man in a butcher's apron stood outside his shop, sharpening a blade that looked far too clean. It felt like a movie set, a perfectly crafted illusion. But something about the way the people moved, the way their eyes never quite met his, made his skin crawl. Just one quick look, Theo thought. Then I'll leave. His eyes caught sight of a small cafe at the end of the street, its windows fogged up from the warmth inside. He entered, a bell tinkling above the door. The air was thick with the smell of coffee and sugar, and a young woman behind the counter greeted him with the same unnerving smile as the others. "Late night, huh?" she said, her voice smooth but hollow. Theo nodded, unnerved by the way her eyes followed his every movement. He sat down at a table near the window and glanced at his watch. 2:17 a.m. The city outside should have been bathed in neon lights and the glow of street lamps, but through the window, all he could see was darkness, as if Ember Lane existed in its own little world. "I haven't seen you around here before," the woman continued, her voice dripping with something akin to mockery. I didn't know this place existed," Theo replied, swallowing the unease rising in his throat. "You're not the first," she said, that same too-wide smile stretching her lips again. "But you should leave before dawn." A cold weight settled in Theo's gut. He glanced toward the door, wondering why he had come in here in the first place. There was something pulling him toward the exit now, an instinctive need to escape. He didn't answer the woman. He stood, backing toward the door without taking his eyes off her. As he reached for the handle, she spoke again. "Don't linger too long. We don't like it when people overstay their welcome." He yanked the door open, and the instant he stepped outside, the warm glow of the cafe vanished. The street was still there, but it was quiet. Too quiet. The bustling shops were now dark and lifeless. Even the people had disappeared, replaced by shadows that clung to the edges of the street, watching him. Theo's breath quickened as panic clawed at him. He turned to leave, but the alley where he'd entered was gone, replaced by an unbroken wall of brick. His heart pounded in his chest as he spun around, searching for any way out. But the street stretched on forever in both directions, fading into the darkness. The street had trapped him. Theo's footsteps echoed unnervingly as he moved down Ember Lane, his breath shallow and fast. The street, once vibrant, was now nothing more than a husk of what he had seen minutes earlier. The windows of the shops were dark, the mannequins inside the clothing store slumped unnaturally, their heads twisted in grotesque angles, as if they were watching him with unseen eyes. He tried to keep calm, but his legs moved with a frantic urgency, scanning the shadows that seemed to stretch toward him. He checked his watch again. 3:05 a.m. Hours remained until dawn, and every inch of his being told him he wouldn't survive until then. As Theo hurried past the butcher's shop, he froze. The man was still there, standing perfectly still, his butcher's knife gleaming in the dull moonlight. But something had changed. His face was no longer human. His eyes had sunk deep into his skull. His skin stretched tight across his bones like the decaying corpse of some ancient predator. His mouth opened in a silent scream, lips pulled back over sharp, glistening teeth. Theo staggered back, barely catching himself as he tripped over the cobblestones. He ran, heart thundering in his chest, but the street seemed to stretch endlessly. Every door he passed was locked, every window a black mirror, reflecting his terror back at him. The shadows, though, were alive. They slithered and crept closer, reaching for him with long, gnarled fingers that seemed to grow out of the walls themselves. Don't look back. The thought rang loud in his head, but he couldn't resist. He glanced over his shoulder, and what he saw nearly broke him. The people, those blurred figures from before, were no longer friendly. Their once vibrant forms had twisted into monstrous shapes. Long, sinewy limbs and hollow faces that gaped at him with endless, soulless hunger. They moved toward him slowly, savoring the chase. Theo's breath came in ragged gasps as he pushed forward, desperate to find an escape, but every corner he turned only led him deeper into the labyrinth of the street. It was alive, shifting around him, closing him in with every step. The shops now whispered his name, their doors rattling as if they were begging to devour him whole. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught his eye. A figure at the end of the street. It was the woman from the cafe, standing perfectly still, her too wide smile gone, replaced with something colder, something more ancient. She raised her hand slowly, pointing directly at him. "The dawn is coming," she said, her voice carrying on a wind that shouldn't exist. Theo's legs buckled beneath him. He stumbled to the ground, his knees scraping against the cobblestones. But the street no longer felt solid. It was as if the ground beneath him was slipping away, pulling him into the void. The shadows were everywhere now, crawling over him, their touch cold and suffocating. The woman stepped closer, her face twisting into a grotesque mask of hunger. "You should have left," she whispered. "Now, you'll stay forever." Theo tried to scream, but no sound came. The street swallowed him whole, its cobblestones shifting and grinding as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon. But there was no escape. By dawn, Ember Lane had vanished, and so had Theo. And when the street reappeared the next night, it was as if he had never existed. But somewhere, in the deepest shadows, his soul lingered, waiting for the next fool to wander into the street. That shouldn't exist.